Think about this scenario with me for a moment. Lights flicker on and you see yourself surrounded by some sort of strange metal sarcophagus. It smells concerningly like blood on the inside, as outside the window you are lowered into the Red Sea below. Slowly the window gets covered up and all you can see are two buttons, one up and one down, with what looks to be coordinates in the middle. You are given a map marked with random locations in what appears to be a large branching cave system. The two navigation buttons draw you to move further along and check out what could possibly be at those points of interest. You hear some small rumblings on your journey and may begin to wonder if you are truly alone in these waters or if there is something else here, something far more dangerous watching you from a distance. And to see outside there is only one possible way, which is through the camera at the very back of your metal coffin. However, the camera may reveal even more outside in the sea than what you may have believed originally. The scenario is of course Iron Lung, the indie game by David Szymanski, the creator of games like Squirrel Stapler and Dusk. His games generally follow a pretty similar vibe, that of course being PS1 style graphic games combined with some sort of bizarre horror scenario. For example, Squirrel Stapler follows you, hunting rabbits and stapling them onto the corpse of your dead wife. That might sound completely insane, and it kind of is. But that's the kind of games that Szymanski is known for. However, what makes Iron Lung a bit different from his other games is just how much it works on an atmospheric level. That really comes down to three things that the game uses to its advantage throughout. That of course being a general lack of information, sound effects, and its suspense focus throughout. These three things together are truly what make Iron Lung stand out so much within the world of indie horror. So let's get into exactly how each of these factors actually works in the game and how they work together to make Iron Lung a truly scary experience. But before getting into that, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe to the channel, as I upload new horror content every other week for you all to enjoy. Also make sure to let me know down below before continuing why you personally think that Iron Lung is so frightening. I of course wanted to make this video because of the new film by Markiplier himself, but I actually haven't seen it yet, so also let me know if that's any good. I've heard mixed things about it, but I hope that it will be good. Okay, now let's get right into it. First off, there's the general lack of any context about the game as a whole, as you are just dropped randomly into the sea without any explanation. Because of that, there are next to no hints of what could possibly be down there and what even truly is the point of this expedition besides the small blurb at the very beginning. And when you get down there, even more threads and mystery unravel themselves as each of the marked locations reveals some sort of strange aspect of the sea that you are trapped within. Some examples are a weird light that shakes the entire ship upon taking photos of it, a skeleton of some sort, and an ancient city buried in the sea. Oh, and also the giant sea monster that chases you around, but we'll get to that later. All of these things work to try and give you a small sense of wonder of what could possibly be going down here, but they don't give enough for you to fully answer the questions that you do have. Things like why some sort of ancient city is there, or why are we in here, or what is that light, and what made the entire planet covered in blood? Could the blood possibly be the victims of this long-lost civilization, or is there something more going on here? Iron Lung gives us these questions, but never fully answers them, leaving us completely in the dark, utilizing a technique I have talked about extensively in the past. That of course being the fear of the unknown, which is something nearly everyone is affected by, as there is so much danger in the unknown. With knowing, you can accurately assess just how much danger you are in, but with the unknown you are quite literally going in blind. It's one of the reasons I think this game really only works the very first time you play it, as once you know the payoff, the game is much less exciting and intense because you know what the threat you are dealing with is. By giving us just enough, Szymanski is able to twine a web of fear that really is exhilarating to play through. This is of course Szymanski using his indie status to his advantage, as he knows what he is able to pull off and he uses it to his advantage in order to breed suspense throughout the game. Also really think about it, would this game be anywhere near as effective if you could see directly outside of the ship without the usage of the camera? Probably not, as the fear of having to leave your post to go back and check the camera is pretty disorienting, because if something were to try and attack your ship, you would be completely blindsided. So in order to actually see outside, you have to take a risk without knowing the chances of said risk each time, and it makes the photography feel like a danger in its own right, which the game of course uses to masterful effect at the end. However, in this section I wanted to note that this really depends on how much you know about the game in the first place. I feel like I can't give a completely accurate assessment here, as for me this effect was largely spoiled beforehand, and thus I wasn't extremely affected by this tactic. In fact, if you somehow find my initial playthrough of it, you would would actually see that I found it quite lackluster. However, this isn't the only trick that Szymanski uses. The next, of course, is the constant sound effects used throughout the entire game. In fact, as a whole, I would say that Iron Lung really is about 90% sound design. There really isn't much to it visually. In fact, I would say this is a useful thought process for any single-person developers out there, because if you look at all of the best indie horror games throughout the past decade, they all have a heavy focus on sound design. For example, for a more recent game, there's Lethal Company, which drops you in a similar manner to Iron Lung with creepy noises being audible in the distance. Hell, FNAF has whole videos out there just on its sound design because that is what makes the game truly memorable. And of course, Iron Lung succeeds here immensely as well, as while going through you will hear nearly everything before you even see it. For example, a loud distorted noise can be heard when approaching the strange light, and you can hear rumblings of something every once in a while on the outside. All of this helps to build a bizarrely fascinating atmosphere that makes it feel like you are really in the submarine yourself. And it's pretty impressive considering the game looks like it could have been made 20 years ago and no one would have batted an eye. Like seriously, I could imagine playing this on a PS1, but the game is somehow still pretty immersive. I think it's mainly because of just how much the sound design really stands out here, as with the lack of visuals, the sounds are all there really is to go off of. So when something blasts in your ear out of nowhere, it's quite startling and definitely made me unnerved on a couple of occasions. It works best when you're exploring one of the caverns near the end and suddenly the collision warnings start beeping. This doesn't happen anywhere else in the game except for when coming close to walls, but upon checking your coordinates, you are nowhere near any walls. Suddenly a loud noise is then heard, so you check the camera to see what's going on. That of course is the fish scare, which is by far the standout when it comes to sound design. This bleeds into my final point, which is the usage of suspense throughout. This is essentially how the last two features work in tandem with one another throughout to make an extremely suspenseful sequence. With a general lack of information and sound design working together, it honestly can make a lot of the game feel somewhat overwhelming. You're trapped in a room with no knowledge of what's going down here and what to do. All of the while, loud sounds can be heard just outside trying to get in. It generally sounds like a nightmare scenario, as you know at this point that there is most likely no escape and that you are going to die in here, especially when the blood begins to rise in the submarine. These work together to leave you on the edge of your seat the entire time while playing, wondering about the inner workings of this planet and what really went down here before you got here. It draws you in slowly like a frog in boiling water, with it slowly getting more and more intense as the game goes along. It almost lulls you in a little bit, as the first half of the game is pretty distinctly calm with nothing really happening to the game until about halfway through. In the first half, it's nearly entirely silent, just slowly ramping up the further you get along, till eventually by the end of the game, the sound design is just completely overwhelming, with nearly everything in the game coming down to hit you all at once. It's pretty interesting because it goes from 0 to 100 just so much faster than a lot of other games do, just because of that super short runtime. It's an extremely interesting premise. However, I'd like to add one small caveat to this, which is the final scare. This is something that I hope they fixed with the actual film, but with all that suspense, expectations are heavily set, and I found the reality at the end to be pretty disappointing. All that wonderful build-up and sound design all to be put towards one little goofy jump scare at the end. Like seriously, the jump scare? I hate to say it, but this is by far one of the biggest flaws with the game in my mind, and thus keeps it from being far scarier than it could be. I was expecting much more than just a simple PNG flying at me, and that's all it is, and it's really disappointing in comparison to the rest of the game. There's always an issue with trying to meet expectations when it comes to horror. I know this with myself as a horror creator. However, this one just, I think, doesn't really make it because it feels like the atmosphere was leading up to something a bit more than just a simple fish running at me at full speed. I know that sounds rude, but that's just my personal opinion on the ending. I think it's probably the weakest part of the game. However, this does not ruin the actual game, as it still holds up right to that very moment. Genuinely up to the actual reveal, the tension is through the roof. It's just when the reveal itself happens that it somewhat falls apart. But while it doesn't stick the landing in my eyes, I still feel like the rest of the game does something that is truly difficult for most developers to do. That of course being building an atmosphere that keeps you on the edge of your seat throughout the entirety of your playthrough. And Szymanski does it masterfully here, with it being a nail-biting experience throughout. It's also helped by the fact that the game really isn't that long, with it taking around an hour max I would say to complete, and it's just you going from place to place. This game could have easily overstayed its welcome, but instead it finishes just in time right before the gameplay loop stales out. And with all that being said, make sure to let me know down below whether you agree or disagree, as I know this game has somewhat mixed feelings along with it. I know for me personally that I also had mixed feelings upon first playing, however I could see the enjoyment in it a bit more with time. Also, I wanted to get you guys something to go along with the new films, although I'm a bit late. And with that being said, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon.